Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Thunder, and this is Getting Ish Done with Ike and Dr. Thunder. Getting Ish Done with Ike and Dr. Thunder. And we're going to have a riveting conversation, productivity oriented. You know, if you a level up, bro, we got some for you. And we're going to be talking about, ideas are dead without craftsmanship. And this is a little bit of a it's a bit of a follow up somewhat from the panel show that we had this past Sunday, Case Closed, which was an all-star panels about Black History Month and everything else. And, so it's going to be a rather interesting, thought-provoking sort of conversation, and we've actually invited one more person for our panel today, none other than what is it? Is it Jareer, the Jareer Springer Show? Oh, no. Wait a minute. Is it Kaizo Empire Live? No, wait a minute. Is it Kaizo? Well, you're getting the point. Misogynoir. I think it. What? No, wait a minute. Noob Saibot. I think it's Noob Saibot. Anyhow, our good buddy Kaizo is going to be along for the ride, and we'll have a riveting conversation. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back with Getting Ish Done with Ike and Dr. Thunder, discussing ideas are dead without craftsmanship. Let's go. Warning:
Uh,
some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. What's happening, Ike? What's happening?
what's up? What's up? What's up? How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. Doing all right. Uh,
Excellent. Did Kaiser show up by the way? Because I see you introduced
yeah,
him.
he's here. He's here.
Oh,
Let me
he
pull
did.
him
He did
up
show up.
real quick here. Let's see.
Yeah.
I
So,
mean, Jareer Springer.
Jared Springer, Kaiserian Empire,
What's
whatever,
up,
whatever Dusty
boy?
thing. Still no camera. Still no studio. It's always next week.
All dust all the time. Wait a minute. Dusk. That was one of them too. Dust after dark.
The dust after that, with it, dust till dusk or something.
No. That's right. That's right. You there? Are you there, Kaizo? All right. Well, we'll minimize him until I see him in the back there.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So,
But what's happening?
I'm just over here, not sleeping enough. Well, and and all that good stuff. It's I've had about I took a little nap before this, and I may have to stay up after it because there's a whole bunch of deadlines and a whole bunch of crap going on. But what are you gonna do, right? That's the price you pay, isn't it?
Hmm. I see.
But at least the diet is okay. It's good, right? So if you have a bad diet, n- um, not sleeping well, not exercising, and you got shitty mental health or whatever,
Hmm.
then all that might compound on each other. But I'm only complaining about sleeping to the degree to which I can complain. So I really don't have any complaints. You never sleep, do you?
What's sleep?
What is sleep indeed? So I'm assuming Kaizo showed up because I see he popped up again.
Yeah. He was there, and then he sort of disappeared. I think. I don't know. We'll uh
Mm,
we'll. I think he's having some dusty internet.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
All right. I mean, we can get it started off. You want me to go
Yeah.
over to the other screen?
You can go over there and just kind of prep it up, but we'll probably talk a little before we get right into that. That's talking about what we are gonna talk about, right? So
Sure.
everyone sees the title saying ideas are dead without craftsmanship. So we want to keep this or start as broad as possible,
Hmm.
which we're pitting two things against each other. On the one hand, you have craftsmanship and what that brings to mind, and you can tell me if you agree with that, Dr. Thunder. What is intended to bring to mind is bringing things into reality, creating things, instantiating things, or shall we say, practice, right? As opposed to pure theory, right?
Mm.
So we're talking about ideas versus the craft of bringing the ideas into reality. And a lot of times we're really, really long on ideas and short on craftsmanship. It's not. It's not something that will change, right? it's just an. Just like the reality. It's almost like the 80-20 rule or something. It tends to be the case. Ideas are the path of least resistance after all, generally speaking. And somebody that says, after all is said and done, much, much more is said than done. And shout out to Jordan Peterson. It does make sense after all that, we're going to talk more than we do because talking is that experimentation that doesn't have any cost, right? You don't have to put yourself out there and get killed. You could just think about the plan and die in idea space, right? And
Mm.
then, come up with another idea. And, we might sit there ruminating about the same ideas over and over and over and over again before we go into action. So even in the best situation, you're probably going to have 5 times more ideas than action, right? For every 1 unit of action, if you will, going to have 5 times worth of ideas. However, it's a lot more than that because people want to, in my view, people overvalue the idea thing, or maybe it's not that. Maybe they undervalue the craftsmanship aspect. They undervalue the fact that it actually nothing will happen unless you actually go in there and practice the stuff. You can write all the sheet music you want, but if no one ever played it, I don't really know what that or what it's worth. No one ever got to the level where they can have enough of the skill to play the music. Then what was that really worth, right? Especially, given the fact that until you play it, no one actually knows whether it's any good, right? Did a thousand monkeys banging away at a thousand typewriters just throw the sheet music together? I guess it's possible, right? Especially with modern music these days.
Mm.
And I mean, real modern music, not modern pop. It is possible that somebody just threw a whole bunch of crap on the page and said that it's really avant-garde stuff, Dr. Thunder. But that is the general thing. Any comments as to what I just said about craftsmanship being undervalued in general? Is that what you perceive out there?
Well, I do think it may depend on uh, it may depend somewhat on what it is we're talking about, um, like what discipline or what medium we're talking about. But I would say that generally, I'd say you're going to have much more on the way of ideas and much less on the way of actually throughput. Bringing stuff actually alive. Because in most respects, that's the real challenge. That's the real work. That's where the risk is. That's where you actually are going to test the idea to see if it's just something in your head or if it's actually something that's going to, be worth something.
Hmm. Yeah, and perhaps you could start sharing this video here because we hear a lot about Mr. Microsoft, right? His name just Bill Gates. Bill Gates. People talk about him in the sense that, well, what did he really invent? And this is meaning that people think, generally speaking, especially when it comes to people in the tech world. What I mean by that, when looking at people in the tech world, when looking at people whom are entrepreneurs in the tech world, like let's say Steve Jobs, people expect that it's going to be theories or in some kind of invention that some kind of breakthrough that they came up, they invented some new thing as opposed to they instantiated an idea that may already exist or that you might have been able to think of, like, oh, all he did was just take existing technology and slap it together in a product. All right. And there seems to be this undervaluing of that thing, right? And
Mm.
I wonder why you think that people undervalue it. And maybe we'll hear from this lady here regarding why she's undervaluing it. But why do people undervalue that? I In general, is an interesting question to me because it's not that there's just there was a proliferation of, because it's like, okay, the idea existed for a long time that this person may be talking about, that, oh, this other person just took the idea as like, well, how come it took so long for it to come into reality? Or how come there's and it tends to be a sense of unfairness that, oh, this person just took advantage and they didn't necessarily have the best idea, or whatever it may be. And it's almost like they don't understand the, you like to talk about the sandpaper analogy, right? That
Mm.
effort that it takes in the real world, right?
Yep.
That when you just you just write some equation somewhere, equals X, you're done. But that equals X, okay? To do it in real life, is a lot. It's quite hard. It's the as an engineer, for example, it is something that I confront uh, daily, which is the understanding that because of reality, right? In other words, the all the contingencies and the roughness of reality, it is engineering is much harder in certain senses than what some people may call pure science. Generally speaking, we know that we're making these kind of rough dichotomies where they may not necessarily exist: theory versus practice, engineering versus science, and all that kind of stuff. But people tend to respect the idea and not understand that it may take years or decades before anybody can actually make that thing work in the
Maybe it's
lab.
not that. Maybe
And they
they.
don't shout out, shout out, shout out. But to that end, maybe you can start playing
This lady
undervalue the
here.
craftsmanship aspect. The undervalue
Sorry about
uh,
that.
or no problem.
Yeah, here I'll play the clip. Here we go.
How did Bill Gates come to exert such power?
Bill Gates did not invent anything. The basic program was made by some mathematics professors in a college. The office operating system was by a software engineer, and he bought it for 50,000. He's built the empire by creating patents on software. And the first WTO meeting in Singapore gave him tax concessions, which is why all the IT industry moved to India. The fact that Silicon Valley became India's Silicon Valley is because they could save $40 billion annually. It was an outsourcing of software, all for Bill Gates. He, with this accumulation of money and making any communication system illegal, like the communication system through real currency and forcing digital payments, he's the one who gains, because all the software for all the digital economy, he collects rents and royalties on that. And then he started to put some of his money into philanthropy. And everyone thinks, wow, he's such a generous man. He gives so
Yeah,
much.
pause here for
But
it.
I've done an analysis.
She really just going all the way in. Now we're gonna talk crap about his philanthropy. This almost reminds me of the old kind of aristocracy looking down on the craftsman type stuff, right? Whereas, oh, they, and then after that, they became aristocracy looking down on what you may call the bourgeoisie and the capitalist type. Oh, this is just money people. Oh, they have a dry goods store. How boring and bourgeois and empty. They're not real. They're not real people. They're not artists and philosophers or aristocrats like we are. So there is that undertone in history and in philosophy. But what do you think about what she said? She was asked, okay, if we recall, she was asked, how did Bill Gates get to exert so much power? And the first thing she said is, Bill Gates did not invent anything. What do you think?
So there's two things. I mean, she could be sneak dissing him, but she could also be uh, actually suggesting that there's a brilliance in what it is that he's actually done, and what it is that what his actual skill is. She could be highlighting what his actual skill is.
Yeah, if you can say that if you're not looking at her face while she's saying it, it's quite obvious.
Yeah. So, yeah, she's obviously uh, has some issue with the dude. Um, maybe he shunned her advances or something. I don't know. I don't know.
But what are your thoughts about her position? In other words, if you just took her at face value, what she said, he did not invent something. It was, mathematicians invented the zeros and ones stuff a long time ago. Okay, Mr. Turing, that was World War II. He was kind of like the founder of kind of like the basic computer logic. Even it was not necessary. It was before him even. And then he talked about the software. He bought it for $50,000. What do you think about that? You said okay that there may
Yeah,
be
yeah.
some brilliance to it.
I would say I would say that ideas are cheap, and that the real skill is involved in walking it out. So whoever it was that did the stuff, that's really not of any major consequence. That stuff would have still stayed on the shelf. We would have got created, but nobody would have done anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I happen to think that what she's saying is there's truth to what she's saying, what she's implying, although she's sort of dissing to get to it.
Now, the another thing that I find is what I want to ask you here is about innovative thinking. And people put innovative thinking purely on the space of, let's just say, pure ideas, not understanding that there is, if we take, for example, the resistance that people give when they say, well, this is the way we've always done something. In other words, that it takes a lot of innovative thinking, or shall we say, boldness, to go against the grain to try to instantiate something new, to create a product that is different from the way things have always been done. And people don't, is that something that you have any experience with? In other words, you're trying to, first of all, there's the notion that people just think of innovative thinking as, oh, it's all in the idea space. And if Steve Jobs didn't create anything in the idea space, then it doesn't matter. If Elon Musk didn't create anything in the idea space, then why is he to be respected? He's not some brilliant guy. But if you've ever tried to do anything new, no matter how mundane and basic, you'll find that you have to be a pioneer, right? In a real sense, in the amount of pushback that you will get from just every place you go, in terms of the people that you're trying to convince that it's the right path to go. A lot of people are gonna be like, ah, no, it's not the way. The people that you're gonna try to get you to help you to put the thing, actually, to make the thing, the whole existing infrastructure is already in a particular way, and they have inertia, and they say, ah, this is the way we've always done it. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, uh, it seems to me that the most difficult thing is all of the it's all the logistics and all of the networking and connecting things and financing something and creating the structure for it to thrive in, looking at the market and saying, when is it going to be the right time for something like this to work? Figuring out, there's a difference between, timing's a big deal. Timing's a big deal. I was talking to some students. I think this was last week, and I was asking them about, because we're doing a Billy Joel show. Billy Joel and Steely Dan. And for the, Billy Joel's quite eclectic and quite the songwriter. It's not just "Baby Take Your Clothes Off." Very, um, very broad and diverse, subject, range, and stylistically all over the place. Some stuff is kind of like Motown. Some stuff's really folky. He's got that song called "The Ballad of Billy the Kid," which is kind of that sort of. It has that sort of, westward, uh, cowboy, kind of sort of vibe to it. But the question I asked them, I said, look, as great as this music is, and as well known and totally, ever present. Like everybody, you hear any of his songs, you know who it is immediately. The sound. I mean, he's wrote so many hits. If he was to come out today, nobody knew him, nobody knew any of those songs, and wrote those same songs today, would he be the same kind of star? Would everybody know him? Would everybody fully embrace? And almost uniformly, and this is a bunch of, college age kids, almost uniformly everybody said no. He would not be, he wouldn't be a star. And one of the students brought up, there's a fairly recent, maybe 15 years old or something like that, where this guy, he finds himself in a reality where the Beatles don't exist. They never existed. But he knows all the songs. So he acts as though he wrote the songs. And it was in a modern futuristic sort of setting, and he became known as the greatest musician of all time. Right. So they had a different view of what they thought transporting someone from the past would do. I happen to think that if it was those same songs, again talking about Billy Joel, it's likely that they wouldn't hit the same way. But maybe the pushback on that is, well, if he's such a great artist, he would adapt. He would be doing something different. And he still would be just as successful, right? Some people might say that. So, yeah.
Is Kaizo back there? Can I ask the Dusty guy to respond?
Yeah, I'm here.
Are you blaming Dr. Thunder for why you couldn't speak earlier? Is that what you're doing?
Uh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Did
Yep,
Dr.
I'm here.
Thunder mute you before?
I was definitely muted from the other side as well.
Oh,
I think I had the wrong thing selected. But it's working now.
Gotcha. Okay, so what do you think about, first of all, what this lady said about Bill Gates? I don't know if you've heard it or if we want to play it again. Oh, shout out to the people
I've heard it.
coming in. Make sure you like and share the stream. All right. Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, I've heard it. I think she's trying to explain to the masses that Bill Gates, Elon Musk, should have said the same thing about Elon Musk as well, right? These are not tech geniuses. I don't think she's talking about the money aspect. She's talking about like the position that they live in people's minds. Because when a typical person hears Bill Gates, they hear tech genius. They hear Elon Musk as well, same thing, tech genius. What she's saying is that these were not the nerds sitting out there crunching numbers, coming up with the abstraction of how to create any of these techs, whether it be Tesla, SpaceX, or these are people who barely understand the logic of what they're doing. As in, when I say logic, I mean as in the integrals of the technology itself. They might know the superstructure, they know the generalities, right? For example, Tesla knows the full range of how to make a space ship, right? He knows from beginning to end, but he doesn't know the specific. He's not out there making, let's say, the aircrafts spacecraft that they're building more efficient. He's not the one who's designing and making sure that it can land back so it can be reusable. These are people who are paid, probably underpaid in her abstraction, and she's just trying to remind the public, like, Bill Gates is not a tech billionaire. I don't think he's talking about the money exactly. She's more of a, as you mentioned, the bourgeoisie class saying, well, yeah, he put things together. Think of it like the creation of the video games in Japan, right? The guy who invented that game, the Mario company. I forgot the name of it.
Nintendo.
Nintendo, right? He actually failed to get a tech job as an actual technician. So because it just wasn't good enough, he just didn't understand the electrical engineering that well at that time. So what he did is he just realized, There already exist some technologies. We have this thing that has screens on it. We have this other thing over here. He just put it together. He took various different techs that existed and formulated it together into a games console. So he's trying to say that Bill Gates is that kind of person. But she's yeah. So I think that's the main spirit that she's coming for. She's not talking about the money. I don't think she cares about the money. She thinks that the money was gotten through ill-conceived, or rather, uh, lying about the amazingness of his sort of interaction, when it's just he saw things that worked and then he put it together, and then he paid very smart people to run his company for him.
Yep.
Hmm. Since you mentioned the money part, I gotta ask you, because we didn't play the full thing, but she started talking about him donating money to make himself look good. She mentioned him buying it for $50,000, with a kind of a look on her face like, he paid for it. Um, is there some kind of also like oh, you're just a money person? Because it also has to do, because money is the way we trade things, right? It's the way we actually get things done in the world. It is beyond her just giving, uh telling the masses, and we'll get into that, what you mean by telling the masses. But beyond her just doing that, is there some kind of anti-money thing going on that you detect that in her?
I don't think it's anti-money exactly. It's just anti artisan artistry. I think she just sees money as it's just something anyone can get, regardless of their talent. Therefore, she's almost thinking like, because I think in her mind she thinks that a real tech billionaire should be someone who earned it, someone who actually came up with the idea and then got funded, not someone who was the one funding ideas and buying off patents. Think of it like that billionaire again. I forgot his name. The one who bought up part of that Taiwanese semiconducting company, right? People look at him in a similar way. He just goes out there and then he funds companies that he already knows the metrics of, and that's how he became a billionaire. He didn't do anything for himself, as in he didn't create a company. He just funds companies that he sees vision and goal. So I think she's looking down at the fact that he's not an artist. So it's again, it's looking down on the artisan stuff. I think the money is just more of a placeholder for that looking down. And also, we didn't see the video obviously, but I think she's going to probably go on and talk about how taxes, him donating money is still really just tax evasion and stuff like that. It still benefits him more than it doesn't actually hurt him. It's the whole principle. Because I've seen women do this before. Unless you lose something in the process of you giving, then you're not really giving. There's that, yeah, there is that element there. But yeah, I think money is a
Is that
placeholder for lack of artistry.
is that true, Dr. Thunder? That well, let me just repeat what he said. That women, if you don't lose something in the process of giving, then you didn't sacrifice. That you just did that because it was easy for you. You.
It does seem like sometimes there's a tendency to, um, okay, so for instance, say for instance someone enjoys their job.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that they're working any less hard at it, and it also doesn't mean that it's any less critical, right? Any less important. It's sort of like them taking criticism, uh, because you know they enjoy their job, and so then therefore that's not real work, or that's not real, you know, that was easy for you. You liked it, so that doesn't count. And yeah, that does seem to be a tendency of some folks.
It almost reminds me a little bit of is this kind of slave morality, I'm tempted to say. In other words, there's this kind of like, if you're not there in a cauldron, boiling somewhere in a basement or in a dungeon and really suffering, then there can't really be value to you. In other words, shout out to Ayn Rand. This is one of the things that she kind of emphasized in her whole kind of morality slash aesthetic point of view is someone who is light, free, happily doing things in the world is not respected by the typical intelligentsia. And I don't know about the masses per se. The masses may not have an issue with it, right? I don't think. But there is a notion of this world almost like this world is not a place where you should be light, free like a butterfly, enjoying what you're doing and being successful. There's something suspicious about you, Dr. Thunder, when you're doing that. Like it's not really of value unless you've been whipped and you're or you're doing it for the people or something like that, or you died before you. I don't know. Am I reaching here? That there's a general moral
I
aesthetic
think
view that yeah.
amongst some, I think that is the case. I also think though that there's a sort of, you know, like you were a sucker or something if if um if you're working too hard. There is that. There seems to be that sentiment amongst some too, and almost a patent lack of respect for certain labor oriented types of jobs, especially the ones that don't seem to be particularly prestigious. So that's an interesting dynamic where both of those things seem to exist.
Mm.
Looking at folks with the side eye if they enjoy their job, like this must be too easy for you, and you know, can you trust that person really? Anywhere from that to the folks that really are doing the back breaking labor, almost seen as being suckers,
Mm.
because they're because they're working so hard and they're not getting, you know, you have that whole 9 to 5, entrepreneur, scammer, drug dealer. You have that whole thing. You ask, they did that thing. This is probably more than a year ago, where that viral video came out, and these young women were being asked if they wanted a drug dealer, a scammer, or a 9 to 5 guy, and they thought the 9 to 5 guy was you know, that was a lame, but the drug dealer and the scammer say, hey, because they get that money fast, and it's exciting and all this kind of stuff. So could be talking about slightly different angles on this, but it's interesting. It seems that both of those things exist.
I see. We can just drop a quick quote here by Steve Jobs, and then we'll kind of shift gears only slightly. But Steve Jobs did say that it takes a great deal, a tremendous amount of craftsmanship between the idea and the product. And he was criticizing the people that were at Apple after he left. Because basically, they thought, oh, now we could just have some idea. If you have a great idea, okay, and you just tell your minions to go do it, that it's enough. And somehow the people, the spearheader, the Elon Musk type, the Steve Jobs type, or even in the realm of politics, I think they like to call it political entrepreneurship, that it's not very important. We can even go to, you see, Mr. Stalin, okay, and on the other hand, you had his rival, whom was, why is his name escaping me now? But Stalin, Trotsky. Okay. Trotsky versus Stalin. Trotsky was your talented, intuitive, well spoken intellectual. Okay. And Stalin was not exactly that. Now, Stalin was very smart. He came first in his class. He was very well educated. Went to seminary school and all that kind of stuff. And seminary school was like the tip of the spear back then, especially where he was from. And but the whole time there's this idea that, oh, Stalin was just, he was not really an idea man. He just, after all, he just created the largest dictatorship the world has ever known and was actually the most powerful human being that has ever existed. I don't care who you want to. You can compare him with the ancient Babylonian kings or whomever. No one ever ruled a territory that large and had the life and death at the tip of his finger and did that until he died in his palace, right? No one else ever did that. But it seems to be this kind of like, oh, but he wasn't brilliant like Trotsky, right? And it's like, if Trotsky was so brilliant, how come he didn't take over the free? How come he didn't have the machinery? How come he didn't have the backup of the people? How come Stalin was running the whole thing and was able to take over the whole thing? Anyways, having said that, let's shift gears slightly into like perhaps the political arena, because Dr. Thunder, you mentioned that this is somewhat of an after show, a continuation of a conversation we had on Thursday. Shout out again to the panelists who showed up on Thursday. Great conversation about
Not on Thursday, on
ideas.
Sunday.
Yeah, the sleep thing. Like I said Thursday twice. I'm gonna blame the sleep, Doctor Thunder. That's what I'm blaming. But regarding, we were talking about ideas of moving forward, in a political nature. Okay, now on the one hand, again, you have the curating, the description of things, the and perhaps the talking about how we got to a particular situation, but then there's the talk of how to get out of it, and similar to what we've been talking about, it being difficult and perhaps it being rare. Dr. Thunder, you talked about the fact that this thing we're talking about depends on the arena that you're in. I find that perhaps politics is the arena where there's probably going to be way, way, way more talk. After all, it's
Right.
politics, right? Than action. But let me start with Kaizo. So since you are not there at that show, but what are your thoughts about this same dichotomy, but in the world of politics, where people come together, they talk about ideas, they describe ways in which people are there. They say, oh, something about the white man in Africa, or something about the Chinese in Africa, or something about whatever, right? And then you ask them, okay, what is to be done? And they're typically short on that. Or if you give an idea, they want to shoot it down about how it's not going to work. Maybe I'm putting two words into your mouth. What do you think about this?
Yeah. Well, I think okay. So, if I begin this cleanly, in America you had Du Bois, and also you had the Jamaican Marcus Garvey, right? And Du Bois was more of an integrationist, and he was like, okay, yes, but he understands what Mr. Garvey is saying, but at the end of the day, America was built for black people as well. So, in sense that they're the ones who contributed, so they have to have a more integrationist policy. Meanwhile, our Jamaican brother Garvey, he was like, no, black people are not getting enough what they deserve. And, this is during the 1900s, and he was more of a, hey, I'm going to create my own coalition of blacks. We're gonna start the Pan African movement, and he noted, okay, well, what do you need in a Pan African movement? You need certain things. You need control of trade. They even went as far as to buy a ship, because then now they wanted to link trade between, let's say, African countries and the Americas. Now, the
The
point
Black
here is,
Star Liner. Go ahead.
yeah, Black Star Line. Yeah. Now, obviously, things didn't go smoothly, right? There's a lot of,
Soul
people coming
time.
in, betraying people, and yeah, lack of planning, and also, just all things got sabotaged. Whichever, whether it's internal or external, it doesn't really matter. I guess what I'm trying to say here is, first of all, not everybody wants to go and build a Black Star liner. Some people want to actually build in America. So same thing here. Not everybody wants Africa free. What they want is the powerful nations to acknowledge Africa and treat Africa well. So I think already here there is a difference between, let's say, slave master dialectic or servant master dialectic, whereby some people want to integrate and some people want total freedom. Obviously, there's truth in both perspectives to an extent, right? You don't want to fully segregate. You want to be integrated, but separate economies, maybe which you control, maybe where, like, let's say the Indians, what they do in the UK, Indian people generally, they are within the UK system, but whenever they open up shops, it's their family members, cousins, etc. So they have like an internal economy by themselves, but they also integrate. Same thing with the the people from Israel, right, in America. They
Yeah,
technically Americans. Wait, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. I hear that. Malcolm X's approach to this was a little different. His thought is was that if if you actually have political power, if you have capital, if you have your own infrastructure, if you've built your own community, and it's a powerful, formidable community, those that are on equal footing, when they come to the table to meet, the idea of integration never arises. The reason it doesn't come up is because everybody is, they're already getting what they need to get. Now you could have
Right,
a sort of, you could have a situation where you make deals, right? You have a particular deal in place or agreements. That's great. That's fine. But uh, that's a little different than, well, it's quite a bit different than integration. In our situation, um, the integration was always unidirectional. It was always in one direction, and it was an act of condescension, actually, right? Because the consideration was that, hey, y'all need help. We're gonna we're going to scoop you up and bring you into our communities. Notice that the
right,
white community uh, did not integrate into the black community. So
right. Yeah, that's actually a good point. That's yeah, exactly. I think what you've just done is married the slave servant dialectic. You don't fully go around saying screw you, because it is something you built yourself as well. You've added on, and you don't necessarily say, "Hey, let me come join you," either. It's more of, okay, we're building power base as well. We are going to seek for equal so-called rights in terms of law, but at the end of the day, we have to create our own power base, our community, and then when we come together, we then negotiate how things move forward. And I think that is I don't want to call it the middle ground, but that is a preferred stance. So the question here is then, Ike was asking, then why, even in what you just explained about the Malcolm X method, why is it that we are less likely to move and act on it? I think there's several things. People usually move and act on their psychological needs. If you look at most of the black movements in Africa or otherwise, or America, it was based on existentialism. Like, okay, is there an existential threat to me? I'm gonna be joining Black Panther because, hey, the police really are, you know, not just police, but the government itself is just anti us. So there's an existential aspect to it. So I
right,
think
it's
to really
utilitarian.
make it,
Yeah,
yeah. So I think that like lack of call to action, like, it's really heavily imbued in, is there really a existential threat to you that right now or not? When you're
right.
integrated, it's really difficult for you to see that threat, because you have enough of what you need to survive, but you don't have enough of what you need to be powerful. So in your mind, you're bargaining. You're like, okay, do I do something or not? Because if you look at Africa or Black America, when there was a real threat, like in Kenya, the Mau Maus, people did rise up and fought against the evils that colonial governments did, etc. So I think that is an element there. Um, there is no existential threat. Same thing with women; they can say all they want about. They don't have to worry about what they wear in the streets, because they really know it won't make a difference in a statistical ratio. But if they knew that, they wouldn't make those stupid arguments, because they'll protect themselves. So I think we've got into this place where now it's a battle of ideas, and in the battle of ideas realm, as you said, there's a lack of continuity into the world of action, because there is no real existential threat that we can see right now in real time.
So, Dr. Thorne, what do you think about that? Do you think, in terms of, that, hey, things were done from a utilitarian mode? If there is no existential threat to you, it tends to be not, you don't get into the action mode real quick. After all, you can still sit and talk and eat your popcorn and sip your wine. So, let's talk some more, and we'll get into the, because I'm not necessarily against talking. But I want to talk about actionable ideas. I've always respected that more, anyways, because, hey, I can sit down and talk about epistemology. I can talk about, let's say, ontology, right? the foundations of being and knowing. But I understand that that's a particular realm, right? But beyond that, I've always respected more things that have to do with trial and error, testing, statistical data, stuff that works, right? And then you can integrate all your philosophical stuff and pretty up, make it nice. You can even be polemical and all that kind of stuff. Very fine. I like all that. I love Christopher Hitchens, and all the other talking heads that are out there in the world, generally speaking. But I like that people talk about action. Now, so Dr. Thunder, what do you think about what Kaizo is saying? You kind of gave some sounds of affirmation to him, saying that there's not an existential threat. It tends not to be an action. And he said something else also about the psychological needs thing, which is just it's true. It's almost axiomatic about human beings. Yes, people generally want to have their psychological needs met, and maybe the psychological need is the need to talk about stuff or where you've been, as opposed to I need to get out of this burning house, so I need to start thinking about how to get out of the burning house. um any pushback on that?
Yeah, so the I think the challenge with this is, and there's an illustration. There's an illustration that, uh, the biblical illustration about, uh, the body of Christ, as it were. You know, they're the hands and the feet, and there's the head and the torso and everything else, and different folks have different roles, right? And everybody's role isn't necessarily the boots on the ground, you know. Um, and and even when you look at the academy, for instance, who has been tremendously influential on the you know the zeitgeist, has been tremendously influential in that. And as I always describe, uh, the academics with respect to social reengineering seem to have been about 10 years ahead, with the ideas, starting with this sort of indoctrination of the students. And then the students rather organically spread the same, these ideas. And then the market is already ready for certain changes to happen in about 10 years. All that stuff is very, very much strategic. And in order to, if you're, say, for instance, trying to get a law changed, or you're trying to put a certain policy in place, it's a representative democracy. You can't just get stuff through purely by popularity, but it is a democracy in that you have to have a number of folks that are willing to pull the lever for whatever particular initiative, whatever policy, put whoever you think is going to carry the water of your, you know, of the ideas that you agree with, the folks that you support, and who's not going to do that, right? So it depends on what you are describing as actually getting something done, or actually being the person that is quote unquote effective in putting something forward, or whatever, or bringing the things forward. It depends on what you define that as. And it seems to me that different folks define that different ways. And depending on how you're oriented, you may define it differently. And depending on what your role is supposed to be, you may define that differently. But it seems to me that all roles would be important. I mean, you need the ideas people, but then you also need some sort of mechanism some structure, some logistic that connects the idea people to the folks that perhaps are more boots on the ground.
Before you
You
land
know,
there, or perhaps you're landing there, and this connective tissue here, we'll get to that point. But let me take a step back to your description of the. I'll pick up the body analogy, but use it quite differently in the sense that there is the notion that the mind is just a slave to the body, not the most eloquent rendition of that particular idea, but you get what I mean here. That the universities that you're talking about, they're not just there. They're not the originators of the movement, right? They may be the ones that turning it into ideas, right? But if economic and technological conditions are such, like for example, you talk about women going having to go to work, wasn't because of necessarily ideas that it ended up happening. It just had to happen, right? On that kind of an existential threat type of stuff. Now there are people who were agitating for it as well, but the mass will then, the main mass movement will happen because of some actual, shout out to BGS, structural realist type situation. And then the the idea people will then prepare the minds of the masses to accept, so goes this particular theory. Okay, I'm not saying that this is clean and it fits everything, but the theory will go like, hey, there's something already happening and the mind is just justifying it. So the mind will be the university, and there's something happening with the body, something happening in reality. The mind is just going to rationalize it, prepare the masses to accept it, giving some arguments and whatnot. But as a matter of fact, if you go back and look in many, many movements, you'll find, oh, there was an economic thing going on, there was a technology thing going on, there was somebody who wanted it to happen. So in your picture, still remaining neutral, not deciding, well, whom does more action than not, if we still remain neutral, is there not somebody behind the university people that actually has more power, that perhaps has instantiated a kind of like this snowball of change that actually has started happening? Okay, industrialization is taking place, and therefore all of a sudden people will start making up ideas to justify and have people accept industrialization, train them in a particular way so that they're fit to be good factory workers and such. If I'm making sense, Dr. Thunder, um, do you
I,
accept that there is power behind the university ideas?
yeah. So what I think is, yeah, certainly there have been sort of uh, course changing events that have happened, and then uh, academics and others have just been trying to make sense of it. That is an aspect of what happens. But there also is this aspect of folks that have a particular political ideology that are doing their best to push that ideology forth, and they have a um, community of, they have students. They have other folks that they can spread that sort of messaging to, and I think that's tremendously impactful. And actually is what lays the groundwork for whatever laws you want to get put in place, because you have enough people that happen to agree with a certain way, a certain philosophy, certain politic, and then you can press those things forth. And I think the last, especially we'll say 50, 60 years have been definite testimony to that. Many of the leaders of these movements were academics, um, and or became academics afterwards. So same sort of idea. But I this thing that you're saying, that there's their way of thinking that the mind is a slave of the body. So the mind basically just has to try to justify what's happening in the body, that kind of thing. I would actually argue that in a very real sense, if the analogy holds, that actually everything is actually taking place in the mind, and that the body is being told what to experience. Um, so that's and that's more the way I think, and that's more the way I think that this stuff happens. There's a sort of um, how do I want to say this? There's a sort of cultivation or a sort of you know uh, you know getting getting folks ready for what the next thing is
Mhm.
going to be, preparation. uh what is it, what's the word that's like almost like a bad connotation
Grooming.
now? Yeah, grooming. There's a grooming that takes place so that they will be easy to push in a particular direction. I think we've seen a lot of that,
Mhm.
and I think our politicians and academics have been at the forefront of that. So,
Yeah, I actually agree with you on that point there. That this stuff goes on in the mind being told what to experience. If, for example, you don't have to accept whatever uh, technological slash economic or structural realities are out there as being the new norm, no matter how much the media comes out the next day and tells you about the new normal, right?
mm-hmm.
However, less than 1% of the people will be aware enough of the mind such that they can actually look
100%.
at things from a fairly neutral point of view.
Yep,
But the
100%.
masses, yeah, will just have their mind prepared to just then, oh, okay, well, this is the new normal, this is the new thing. Makes sense. Now, Kaiser, do you want to comment on any of that? You got us down on this line of the psychology of the existential threat and then leading to action. Dr. Thunder took us into the role of academia preparing people. And then now we have this dichotomy between it's not even a real dichotomy. It doesn't, there's no real. There are some very few people whom can actually maybe try to think a little bit, okay? Try to get a little bit of freedom and see and say, hey, what's this thing going on around me? And why should I accept it? Right. And then, but the majority of people will accept whatever those higher ups have decided to feed them. And then also there's the big guy lurking behind the curtain, which we might want to talk about, which Marcus Garvey says, hey, I want to create Black Star Liner, create these things, and then become the big guy lurking behind the curtain. Okay. So there are two fronts here. You have the front of the mind, you want to be able to prepare people's minds, but you also want to be the person that is dictating the substrate type situations that minds should then get prepared for. Um, one of it, they're both big challenges. I've said a lot there, but go ahead and react to what you will, Kaiser.
Okay, yeah. So I think in this sort of landscape, because I think before we said something like the spirit of the times, zeitgeist, a lot of philosophers, European philosophers, have said such a thing. And this zeitgeist, right? I think it is existentialism is actually a big factor in this. When something comes up and it can rifle or raffle up the spirit of people. People know, okay, let's say racism, right? Black Lives Matter. All these things happened because there was a knee jerk reaction in people's spirits. They were like, this doesn't make sense, and they could immediately get behind it, even without looking at the so-called creators of the movement and their incentives, sorry, not incentive, their propaganda that they were actually trying to espouse. A lot of these people wanted to remove black families. That's it, on their own manifesto on the website from the beginning. It was funded by certain people, and there were black female lesbians who didn't like black men. That in fact, I read their manifesto. Nothing about black men. It was all about black women and children, and destroying the two parent household. But because this thing really kind of affected people's spirits, they ignored all that. They didn't think it was relevant, and they didn't even know it existed. So I guess what I'm trying to say here, like when it comes to actionable um, the ideation, is this: there is a point to these people who like to talk. The point is that you're supposed to be building a model until an existential threat comes along, and then your model now has to become the superior one that gets enacted, because the time will come. It's almost like any business. You prepare yourself for the war, and when the war comes, and it will come, you better be the one with the best army,
Yep.
as opposed to just having a ragtag
Okay, so
group.
I like that, and I want you to react, and then Dr. Thunder as well. So I talked about the fact that, hey, I like thinking that is about action. Okay, so and that's why on the in the show on Sunday, I did start out the conversation with, I said, has Black History Month run its course? Meaning one has to then start thinking, okay, well, what was the need for it? What was the end trying to be met? How would that be measured? And how far have we come? Is perhaps Black History Month still the good vehicle for reaching this end to the degree to which we say this end has not been reached? Is something like Black History Month? Okay, so that's just one thing. It's not a particularly complex model. But overall, I moved the conversation forward into model building through history, looking at history as though it was an experiment, a series of experiments that you've created. And you have certain hypotheses, and then you try to test it with the results of the experiment. You read through the experiment, and then with all you're doing all of this to be able to build a model that can then predict action to guide you in the future. And that kind of thinking, I am saying, is still generally not present. In other words, still thinking, but there's the thinking of building the model, and I mean not present in a particular camp. It's huge in another camp. There's, like, for example, you talked about, the Black Lives Matter. Those people are always thinking about models of how to move people around. Okay, but I think that if you take, for example, let's say the manosphere, shout out to them. uh, if you take the manosphere, that there tends to not be this kind of thinking of like, okay, this is the way things will be moved towards the particular end that we're after. There tends to be the idea of, oh well, it's a very varied air place, and there's room for different kinds of people, and who knows what the ends really are, and we need to keep on still talking about this. Like, there isn't this, okay, no, I'm going to pick up this baton, right, or I'm going to pick up this stick, and I'm going to say, over there, that's where the exit is. Okay, like, that's where it is. Okay, and in my experience, somebody has to do that. Otherwise, the tendency is to say, oh, there are many different people, and they have different ideas, and who knows where we need to
Yeah, but
go.
the one of the problems inherent, it seems, with what it is that you're suggesting is that somehow everyone would even want to go to the same location.
No, not at all. I'm not even suggesting that at all. I'm saying that when I ask an individual, they should give me their answer, as opposed to tell me that, oh, everybody thinks differently. You get what I'm saying? It's like, you say,
Well,
this
no,
is
I
my
get that.
program.
Okay, okay, I get that. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like, because I'm not to force people to go with you. We're still even just talking about thinking, right? So this is my idea. This is my model. This is how I think we're going to get to this particular place. And then you start running that program. In think tanks, for example, they've decided, like, okay, cool. We're the Hoover Institute. We're slightly to the right. This is what we would like to happen with regards to relationships with China and with regards to domestic policy. And they're not going to force anybody to join them, but they're just going to keep on digging there. If you don't do that, it will never happen, is my contention. And everybody will keep on deferring to everybody else. And everybody will keep on saying that there needs to be more conversation had, as hoping for this kind of spontaneous consensus by committee,
Yeah,
or
I don't
hoping,
think it.
as you may
Yeah,
have suggested, yeah,
yeah, I don't.
hoping, as you may have
Yeah,
suggested, that,
go
let
ahead.
me just, that perhaps, if I won't say something until or if I say something, then I expect everybody to kind of come with me. It's like, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm talking about a purely one could say individualistic, but it's the way leadership is. It's what leadership looks like, generally speaking, is to just say, that's the exit that I'm working towards. These
Yeah.
are
So
the ideas that
you're
lead to
looking
that.
for you're looking for objectives. You're like, okay, this is what the objective is, and so then now I'm going to measure what's happening based on what I've said the objectives are, and then also that makes it easy to evaluate if it's being effective or not. Because hey, you said this was the objective, and you still haven't done X, Y, and Z, which would clearly be the precursors to, you know, getting to the objective. And
Correct. Correct.
right, and I get that, and I get that, um, and I think there are some that do have particular objectives in mind. Um, Dr. Johnson said that one of his his objectives was to try to create a vocabulary, a way to talk about, create a glossary of terms that can be used to have these conversations and to even bring anything forward at all. Because prior there was no terminology to discuss, especially stuff from a black male experience, because it had been overlooked. Um, and
Hmm.
so, and I would say, okay, it seems like at least aspects of that objective have been created and um, uh, have been accomplished rather. And and he has this, I guess it's 17 points now, which is not in a format for being submitted, right? It's not a proposal. It's an open list of items, and over time, we'll see what happens if that actually gets to the place where we start talking about actual policy. Um, and I know that
Now
some
you sound
folks,
like a historian and an observer, right? Um,
no,
by that, what I'm saying is, we will see if we will get to the place. Now, uh, my general personality is just to jump ahead, jump to the conclusion, with the understanding that I'm gonna be the only person there, and that all these other things about the coming up with the vocabulary and stuff is still gonna be happening, even if I wasn't looking at it, right? But I have an exit, right, already in mind, and I'm gonna just jump there. And perhaps what I'm saying is, I don't see enough of that spirit. And this is not just about the manosphere. Writ large, generally speaking, right? There tends to be not enough of the spirit of, I'm gonna jump to that place with the full knowledge that I'm gonna be perhaps one or two or three people there, and that there is no danger of me losing any of the other, um, of the, shall we say, scholarship that is going on, because that's just going to happen of its own course. That will continue to happen no matter what. However, if I don't jump there, no one will jump there. The scholarship is not going to create some kind of kindling where a match is then going to be struck and then boom, it all strikes the fire. I find that not to be the case. The only thing that can strike on fire is that actual model of an exit ready to go, possibly such that when something happens, you can pick it up and say, okay,
well, it
cool,
needs
we already have. Yeah.
well, yeah, it needs a Bill Gates, is what you're saying. Now, uh, so this is interesting because I don't see the issue as being the sort of idea folks, the intellectual folks, uh, the scholar folks. I don't see it as an issue of they're not doing their job. I see it as more of uh, a breakdown of well, a lack of existence of a particular structure, right? So, you could say that there still is this dynamic in other communities. However, there is in communities that are more successful and industries that are corporations that are more successful. There's a mechanism to sort of you're not trying to get the scholar folks to do other stuff other than the scholar stuff, but there's the other stuff that's there that connects things. It seems like a lot of that stuff is just missing in when you start talking about black stuff anyway. That stuff just tends to be missing. And I remember one conversation you and I had about there's like certain kind of content, even productivity kind of content, or kind of business kind of content. All that kind of stuff seems to be not really a place for that on like black YouTube. Like there is a place for that, uh, other places and stuff that gets a lot of views, but it just doesn't really get a lot of views in black YouTube. And it seems that there's just a lack of a certain kind of connecting tissue. And it seems to me that rather than attempting to try to get the folks that are in their lane, and their job is curatorial, is intellectual, is conversation based, is whatever. The we have to find some sort of way to connect that with other folks that do other things, or something. That seems to be more of the deal. And I'm more of a so it's interesting. So I'm more of a and I'm an intuitive. So the way I usually work is I jump in and start doing a bunch of stuff, and probably a lot of it is not as efficient or not the right way. I'm hands on. I'm doing a bunch of work. I'm already, 3 steps down the street. That's my tendency, is to do it that way and then to backtrack and sort of like fill in the holes. But that's not what everybody's. And I'd say that I'm probably unusual in that way. Of all the academics that I know, academics don't tend to actually do that even. They tend to like sit around and think about it for a lot longer and then decide to finally do something, or never decide to do anything and be just satisfied in the sort of broadening the mind. Right. But that's just, hey, that's just a type, and that's what they are. So I don't know. Maybe those folks, if we weren't so developed, those would probably be the cats that got ate by the lions, and then we wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. But in a society like ours, where now there's actually space for those kinds of folks, you can sit in the library all day, and that can be your job. It's just to sit in the library.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree for sure that you don't start asking these people to do something else. And the reason why I mentioned myself, and then you've also mentioned yourself, is I'm not pointing the finger at anybody else.
Oh yeah.
I am say, and when I do say it, it's to kind of awaken the spirit in anyone else whom is like me, to say, hey, fine, don't worry about the circumlocution that will continue to happen, and don't wait for people. Go ahead, jump to conclusions, go ahead, start doing something. Or at least if you in the realm of thinking, which I do like the realm of thinking a lot, but build that model. Take for example, let me ask you this, Kaizo. When you jumped into the manosphere uninvited as misogynoir, one of the things that you were berating people with was the whole reason why you were, the whole kind of storm you created was because you were on that whole action based thinking. Like, okay, look, here's what you do. You were all into the taking over the black churches, for example. Like that was one of the main planks of your whole thing. It's like what you do is you take over the black churches and you do this and you do this and you do that. And there was just like a wave of like, oh, and like almost like it's impossible, right? And here's one thing. And so I'm asking you to both comment on that, but then here's another thing that I perhaps the non-intuitives don't tend to understand. When you say something like take over the black churches, they're actually thinking they see the physical impossibility of it. While me, I say what I think is you try to take over and then you see what happens and you may find some corner or some alternative, just like trying to find product market fit, right? Where you're like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna go in with this agenda. What if I start writing papers about doing this and I start trying to fund blah blah, and then maybe I'll find something. You're like, oh, as a matter of fact, there's a gaping hole over here, and
Mhm.
boom, I can drive through it. Meanwhile, other people just see like they just see the how could you even possibly do that, and then they stop. Well, but what do you say about that?
Yeah, obviously, yeah. Whenever you're trying to do anything, you go out there, you do the action, and then hey, new ideas or offshoots are gonna come. But even this, in a very sensor way, the Hebrew Israelites did exactly that. They took over the black churches. They control their women. The women are in, etc., etc. So they did it actually. Now they expanded all across Africa. There's like 10 African countries with Hebrew Israelites right now, and they're doing the same thing. So even at a very practical scale, it can be done. It's just maybe I guess some of us on the manosphere are kind of more atheistic leaning. Maybe not exactly. We don't believe in God, but the sort of lack of practice or you know imbuing God
A
into their
religious.
sort of systems. I think that's one of the issues why there was an allergic response to that specific thing as well. Um, yeah, but yeah, I think ultimately, we need to understand, obviously, in the manosphere especially, right? A lot of these men have real issues, real existential, red pill rage or red pill whatever. They had real issues that they're dealing with, whether it's depression, their family situation, whether they're kids of fathers who weren't allowed to be, in their lives by the, other people in the state or their mothers, etc. So a lot of them actually are here to actually build a space so that, for them to actually express themselves. Solution is there, but the main thing is, or rather should I say, the solution for them right now is actually dealing with life and creating that space where the rest of society has alienated them from. We know the typical stuff, right? They tell a man to express their emotions. Okay, man, express emotion. No, not that way, right? That's not what we want you to do. We want you to do it our way. So I think a lot, we just got to acknowledge that the manosphere is here for a slightly different purpose. It's not just a solution, or rather, the solution here is actually allowing men to actually be psychologically fulfilled, and that in on itself is actually a viable
Okay,
solution as well.
and you're doing the historian observer thing, and I get it. Looking at the manosphere. Now when I, generally when I speak, I tend to speak from the point of view of the outlier, as though the outlier was just normal, right? So, and we have three people here whom are, let's say, um, rather unusually intellectual, but and also practical. That is not typical, and that's probably why all three of us are here, right? Um, and to that end, if you represent one of these types of people, Kaizo, okay, what do you then do, right? So because you can talk about, oh yeah, and I completely agree with you. If you look at the space in general or any general kind of space, you're gonna have people dealing with their psychological needs. But if something is to be done, and you may forget all the chains that you see, especially difficult in this space. Okay, so let's make the task clear. Like it's especially difficult for reasons which Dr. Thunder has mentioned, saying generally speaking, in the black sector of edutainment and whatnot is heavy on the entertainment side, kind of sparse on the, shall we say, practical education model building, thinking about solving a problem. Tend to find that stuff kind of boring. Like, oh, you're gonna talk about capital gains or this or that or how what the next trend is or freaking satellites in Africa. No, f that, right? But I understand that it's particularly difficult in this kind of a context. But what does one do, Kaizo? What are you gonna do, young man?
For solutions, yeah, you just got to go out there and start building your empire. That's why I'm building the Kaiserran Empire, finding people like Kifaru,
Oh no.
studying up political, whatever lobby groups and all that stuff.
Okay,
So I
so
think that is what I'm doing.
talk about the PAA and that kind of
Oh,
stuff,
okay, I'll
right?
give you an
So
example.
be
Yeah.
be practical before you get to the
Okay.
empire.
True. True.
uh, what
Okay.
exactly do you do?
Okay. Cool. Cool. So what I do is this. I go ruffle some feathers in the manosphere as a misogyn blank. After I do that, I create my YouTube channel. I focus on geopolitics, and sometimes I have African American topics to get more views. Now, once I do that, I create this system where people, whether they like me or not, they respect me enough to listen to every word I say. After that, you get all the chaos of everyone coming into the channel. An example is a guy called Kifaru. He says, you know what? I've had all these conversations. We've talked about why Africa is behind. We've abstracted everything. We know all the, we know all the crevices. So, okay, how about we create a secret society of basically like a lobby group that will go into different African countries, fund some youths, open up political parties, and then we create puppets, leaders, and then we implant them. And then we evolve as we do this process until one day, right? We've implanted enough puppet leaders across African countries to the point now the Kaiserran Empire is now awake. So for me,
Okay,
that is
good,
the
good.
thing I'm working on right
Yeah,
now.
okay, cool. I like that, and that's like on a practical direction, and then on the model direction, you have insane people like IC3, right, whom are insane to actually enough to actually have a model, and like I respect models. I don't care whether they're crazy or not, whether it's something like, oh, take over the church. Okay, go flesh it out. I want you to go do the research on how you're going to take over the church. I respect stuff like that because in there's going to be you're going to learn a lot, and there's going to be, or at least it shows a penchant for action, which I find, which I find to be the top of the hierarchy. Action is what's going to get you out of stuff ultimately, and the mind, yeah, but use it towards action. And that's why I respect philosophers like Peter Thiel as opposed to some dusty guy in the village who never did anything with his life and just read books. So on the model side, you have IC3, and what does he say? What is his model, if you will, about black liberation worldwide?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Kaizo?
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So with IC3, interesting character. He's one of my regulars now, and he's actually a very supportive brother. He shares my channel on Twitter and other spaces. Now, very, very interesting guy. Very, very interesting guy. So I'll start off by saying, at first he came to my channel and he's out here trying to tell us what's the solution, right? It's kind of interesting. He's kind of using words like solution, which is more actionable, yet he's building a model. But I get it. I know exactly where he is at. Now, the interesting thing with this guy is he believes, obviously, that there's a global white supremacy system in this planet. And he believes that we're stuck in a prison, the prison analogy, meaning we're all working. He's not wrong. That's just Hegel dialectic, slave master dialectic. It's true. We're stuck in a prison. As non-white people, we are basically the prisoners. There's when I say situations are going wrong in our communities, it's because we've been forced into a prison, and that's why we're fighting each other because of proximity, lack of access to freedom and resources, etc. So we're fighting over the small crumbs that we have, etc. Now, he's actually fleshed out his model to include so many things that actually is going to be useful if you're going to do this kind of movement. Economics, okay, banking, or how do they take you down? We know how they took down Zimbabwe, simply banking, right? They simply put sanctions, embargoes on them, so other people couldn't easily trade with them unless they paid heavy taxes and tariffs. That's a simple example. So how can you be free from a global banking system? Over there, because once you start doing the movement, now you can be free to an extent until whereby it reaches the end whereby you can be sabotaged because you're still in their system. You're technically still in their prison. Again, it's an analogy. So we've also gone further into other aspects of, okay, tribe. Okay, Africans don't want to give up their tribes, right? At least Black Americans are one in a sense because they all believe they're one people. But Africans, even within one country in Africa, nationalism still isn't quite a thing yet. You're still gonna literally have tribes. thinking they matter more than a nation state. So how then do you, marry tribes with a modern nationhood concept? Things like that. Because all these things, if you don't consider them, you really might not have the best sort of angle to tackle these problems when you're actually solving the situation. You might solve one problem and ignore everything else. You know how, what's that term saying, when you fix one thing and then you actually inadvertently cause a rupture somewhere else? There's a term for that. I forgot what it's called. Um, inadvertent consequences. I don't know, but there is a term that people use for that kind of
Unintended
stuff. So yeah,
consequences. There's
yeah,
technical
unintended
debt.
consequences.
There's whack-a-mole. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, but I don't think it's unintended. It's just unknown consequences. Yeah, because
Collateral damage.
yeah,
But one thing that IC3 says, and I want Dr. Thunder to perhaps react to this, is the whole idea of this, because the main thing with his model, and again, the reason why I like that you mentioned that if you don't have a model, you're in the danger of just going after things in that kind of a whack-a-mole way, where you hit something here, something else pops up, and then you're just hitting. There is no coherent view, right? And that's why I'm for, hey, just run to the exit with a coherent view. Tell me that here is my synopsis. And if it doesn't make sense, it'll be very clear, right? Like, so it's not like, oh, but then people are just gonna be saying nonsense. It's like, nonsense is very easy to understand, or to discern, I should say. So there's some kind of a coherent view, and in his coherent view, I see threes, that is the idea of a black nation. Okay, sounds like Pan Africanism and all that kind of stuff. Okay, which might annoy some people, but the idea of this IC3 is a designation, right? IC3 is a designation of black people, and you form that nation, such as creating ice, right? And then out of that ice, you can build swords and shields and certain other things. And then you go in a rather tactical and systematic way to mine what he calls white supremacy, take stuff out of there using white people that are helpful, right? Even in your, so even takes into account, certain practical realities that, yeah, you are living in a community of other people and such. But that identitarian aspect of, like, let's create the black nationhood, a black uh, uh, spirit, whatever. What do you think about that, Dr. Thunder? You don't know this guy or his model or nothing, but you understand that, okay, he's saying, look, until there is that thing, and the Pan Africanists perhaps have said something similar, that then until there is that thing, then there will be no real change.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah. So this seems to be. So are we okay? So are we saying? Well, let me just say this. I'm I describe myself as a black nationalist. I'm kind of libertarian, sort of. I'm third party. I'm not on the right. I'm not on the left. Um, I have certain conservative leanings with respect to family structure and with respect to traditional religions. I tend to lean towards the Abrahamic religions, the traditional forms of those, right? As far as the black nationalist thing, I do agree with Malcolm that without having our own thing, well established thing, then we're never going to be in a position to be able to sit down at the table with others that actually have power. Um, Problem with the integration, the forced integration thing, which I think is actually produced most of the issues that we're still experiencing. Um, the issue with the forced integration is that it's a hypocrisy because you have someone that hates your guts putting their arm around you because they are being forced to take a bad deal because you don't have anything of value to them, but they're supposed to treat you like you're equals. And I think part of even being able to move forward is asserting that there is a sort of basic level of equality, at least a perceived level of equality. Otherwise, any agreement will be made by someone else. It's sort of coerced. It's not. It's not genuine. It's not. They're not doing it because they want to. They're doing it because they're compelled to, or because they think they'll get canceled if they don't do it or something. And that's not the great. That's not the best sort of circumstance to try to build something that needs to be stable enough, enduring enough to, sustain a community that's already totally dysfunctional. It's already in disarray. It doesn't take much to topple that thing. It's already on fire. Folks just need to get out of there, right? So I'm just saying this to say that I think you have to have some sort of you have to have something that you can offer, or you can't even sit down at the table. I certainly don't want to be involved in sitting down at the table, and I recognize that basically I'm just begging. I don't see this as I'm not looking for an angel investor, someone that I'm already acknowledging that they have something that I want, but rather someone that sees me as something that they want, right? So anyhow, so to the extent that plans can be, steps can be made towards creating more sort of autonomy and more of a power center for Black people in this country, I think that's the probably the most critical piece that's missing, that makes all this other stuff sort of disintegrate. And even if you do have some good ideas, you don't have anywhere to go with it. And you don't really have anyone to ally with, because why are they going to ally with you? They don't get nothing out of it.
So shout out to Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter. They attend these gatherings of center right for the most part, even though it's not put that way, organizations of Black folk outside the United States though. And one of the things that I've gathered is there is not a similar thing that can happen in the United States. What I mean by that is intellectuals and perhaps maybe some industry people, think tank types, but not necessarily on the left purely, and not necessarily all singing from the same hymnal. Perhaps maybe a little iconoclastic, such as just like Glenn Lowry is, right? The kind of, an iconoclast type person. And that they mention that this is something that, even though they're not as explicit as, it might be said in certain places like here in the Manosphere, that it's something that it's not here in the United States, where there seems to be more of an orthodoxy, which kind of almost is paradoxical in a certain sense. It's like it's ironic. It's like there's an orthodoxy, but there's not really cohesion, right?
Yeah.
Um, Meanwhile, they go to these places, and Black people can think, quote unquote, outside the box about solutions without it being, some kind of, without people having to call each other names, or without it ultimately having to fall into, well, the program is we have to fight, um or not being so preoccupied with, let's just call it victimhood, because you could acknowledge white supremacy and create a whole thing about fighting white supremacy without looking through this victimhood lens, And the victimhood lens perhaps could be characterized as what Kaizo said before, as looking for acknowledgement from the white person, as opposed, or
Yeah,
wanting the white
white
person
folks
to
ain't gonna
acknowledge.
do that. That's
Yeah,
never gonna
and wanting
happen.
the white person to acknowledge what they did wrong, and they have to come to
Look,
terms, and we need to have a
look.
conversation
The
about.
best, yeah, the best thing that you're gonna get, the best thing that you're gonna get is some of these freaking, the white liberals, during the, the sort of a reemergence of the Black Lives Matter stuff, where they was going up to random people, random black folks, and getting on their knees and stuff and asking them for forgiveness, you know.
Mm.
And that stuff is total hogwash because look, you don't even you don't so you don't know me, I don't know you. What did you do to me? So you think you're better than me? You think you're better than me by you acknowledging that you have white privilege? How are you privileged to me? I had two parents. I grew up in the country. I had everything. Horses, four-wheelers, go-karts, every music instrument that I wanted, father that was very supportive, played the instrument that I would, that I play. I had all the stuff. Full scholarships to schools, all of that. I had all that. So you tell me how you are more privileged than me. What your white privilege? Tell me how that has, See, I don't like that because it doesn't address the actual issue. When you personally have done some stuff against a specific black person. When you stood in the way and it was your fault that X, Y, and Z happened. But you're not saying anything about that. Because that's the real stuff. That's the real stuff. Tell me about how, you were a branch manager at a bank and there was two different folks that came in that were candidates for teller, and there's a black one and a white one, and the black one was actually more qualified and had a better interview, but that you just hired the white one because you felt more comfortable with that. Tell me about that. That's what I want to hear about. Since you all about, repenting and confessing and stuff. Don't do some freaking meaningless stuff, kneeling in front of somebody you don't even know, freaking insulting them. That'll be the closest thing that you get to white folks, because the thing is that they shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be doing that. Why does that benefit them? See, this is one of the issues I have with the way all of this stuff goes. The thing is most white folks, they don't care what happens to you because they're trying to figure their own stuff out. They're not plotting against you. Mm-hmm. That's not what's happening. Now, we can talk about the system that's in place. We can talk about, things that can be adjusted, issues X, Y, and Z. We can talk about how this, the white liberal thing, has been sort of used disproportionately. Those are the folks that are putting these policies in place that are actually doing the real damage, especially to black men and boys. The diversity and inclusion stuff, we can talk about that. But white folks are not out here plotting against you. They're not out plotting against folks. I mean, I grew up with white folks. They don't look, they treated me with respect. Sure, they had some, whatever views, whatever their thoughts on things that maybe I thought were maybe misinformed or whatever. You know, when I had hair, somebody tried to touch my head once. Oh, I just wanted to see what your hair feel like. But come on. uh, I I don't know.
You
I
say that
just
in jest, Dr. Thunder. It is something that I heard recently. You know you know Coleman Hughes.
yeah, of course.
He's got a yeah, okay. And Coleman was in a podcast recently, and typically he wouldn't say stuff like this, but he was somewhere where he felt like, okay, perhaps to play to the crowd a little bit, he had to bring up some racist experiences, right? And that's typically not his
Mhm.
lane, right? His
Right.
lane is very kind of anti woke, if you will. And he was talking about people touching his hair and stuff like that. um I
Look,
find that one.
I've had more of that. To me, seems to be more curiosity than anything.
Yeah, it's
But
like, okay.
yeah, but I will tell you. I mean, there's been clear stuff that has happened to me that's been clearly racially motivated, including folks getting in my face and calling me, you know, the N word and all of that, all of that kind of stuff. Of course, I was a kid. They wouldn't try that now. That probably would not be advised to do now. But when I was a kid, that stuff happened. Getting profiled by police. I got profiled at the university I work at. Dude, look, man, I'm gonna tell you, this is no lie. This is 100%. I was, uh, you know, because I'm a black man in America, so I always have to have my ID, right? But for some reason, I just happened to not have my ID with me. I don't know what happened. I think I left it at home. I just didn't grab my. I don't know what it was, but I like me, my wife, and my son will go down to the pool. We're at a hotel, and I'll have my ID with me. It'll just be the license. I'll pull it out. You have to shimmy it out of that. The clear thing. It's hard to get it out of. I always have my ID, but for some reason I didn't have my ID, and I had my gym bag with me because I was about to go to the gym. This is literally standing in front of my office building. Literally standing in front of my office building. Okay? And campus police were there. They said, "Hey, why are you here?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm about to go to the gym." And he says, "Hey, why are you here? We need some ID." I was like, "Oh, I don't have my ID, but I'm professor of jazz saxophone here. My office is right there, third floor." And they said, we need some ID. We need you to ID." And I was like, "Well, I don't have any idea. We can walk across the street to the School of Music office over here, and they can ID me for you over there." So we go in there, and they ID me, and they say, "Oh yeah, that's like this." And it's funny because the person that ID'd me was one of the only other black folks, black woman that, and she of course was appalled. It's like, what the heck is going on? So this stuff has happened to me. I'm a black man in America. I'm 48 years old. So you can imagine I've had a number of experiences and I've had a couple weird interactions with the police. When I was a kid and stuff, a policeman was pushing me around and stuff. I've had that kind of stuff happen, right? But my point is that stuff is outlier stuff. That ain't the usual, normal, common stuff. The common stuff is, folks don't care enough about you to be plotting specifically against you. They trying to get their own stuff happening. However, within systems, that's where the actual danger is. And the politics thing within a particular system, that's when there's actual more danger of that kind of stuff. But John Q. Taxpayer, they don't care about you.
All right, all right, all right. The time is far spent already,
Oh
and
yeah.
I think that we were able to drill into this topic fairly well. Okay, starting out broadly, talking about this difference between craftsmanship, which is what it takes to bring something into reality, right? You can have an idea about this great piece of furniture, but if you're not a skilled craftsman, it is not going to come out the way that you expect, and it's not going to work. It will never get built. So there is, or I should say, and having said that, there's a tendency to undervalue what it takes to actually do this craftsman type of work to bring things into reality. And we started out with the lady talking about Bill Gates and how he did not invent anything. And I think that there's a general misunderstanding, perhaps as a side note to the whole political thing, which we ended up on, but just a general misunderstanding. And that's why Kaizo came in saying that she's educating the masses of what certain types of people do and that they're important. Because I think that they think that these, the technology that they see around them is going to happen as it's like almost inevitable. It has to happen given the fact that you have scientists that have come up with ideas. Therefore, the technology should happen. But no. And as a matter of fact, even with many people that may try to instantiate the technology, they never find, shout out to you, Dr. Thunder, you talk about timing. You talk about also there's a product market fit. Somebody may look at Steve Jobs and say, well, what's so special about him? Is that, well, that whole design thing is very important. There's a reason why, you know, I mean, especially if you go back in the day, Apple just looked way better, just made more sense than all these other crazy things, both hardware and software that other people were designing, right? So is that not important? And that is quite directly tied to the craftsmanship thing. And then we went into the political realm where we talk about political craftsmanship or making change in the real world, what it takes, and the importance of models that perhaps, and we did not talk about that particular the connective tissue and the sinews that should be connecting the people who are in the idea space, and then maybe forcing them to create models, right? Because some intellectuals left to their own devices are just going to they just it's almost like they're experimentalists without any model in mind. They're not creating any kind of coherent theory about how something works where there's gonna you can pull out of it means and ends. You say, according to this theory, if I try X, then Y should happen. So that is the beginning of that connective tissue. There is models, and it requires people to, as I mentioned, run to an exit and say, look, we've been talking about this cave since forever. It seems to me that everything we've said, and doesn't take too long, okay? I listened to two of your conversations, and what I found out is everything implies that the exit is over there. I'm going to go over there and see how we can build a model around getting out of that exit in that way. And you can go trial and error that and build a whole think tank and institution around that. And then you might attract one or two people, or then you can influence the body politic through funding or whatever it may be. But that's the way that it typically happens, and that is the tip of the spear. And as the tip of the spear, that is a small area, and it is represented in reality that that's going to be a small area. And if you are of this particular bent, bent towards action, then you should take the action without necessarily thinking that people are going to be behind you. One should not expect that. One should expect that the people are going to be doing their thing, and that this is your lane to go and forge the model and then try out a few things. But Kaizo, I'm going to give you an opportunity to make final thoughts, and then Dr. Thunder can close us out. What are your final thoughts regarding this whole topic that we've talked about here regarding the penchant for action versus the penchant for just pure ideation without models for action?
Yeah, I think ultimately, you do need a model. Otherwise, the action that you're gonna implement might not be as clean as possible. So, build your model, make it as you know, as expansive as you can, and make it, as accurate as you can. But at the end of the day, obviously, action has to come there, and also the model is better if it has action potential in it, so that the jump from model to reality is not too huge that it causes confusion. But at the end of the day, if you want to do anything in this any space of movement, you do need you need to be with the zeitgeist, whether it's manufactured, like false flag situations, or if it's or it's just utilizing whatever's happened, some kind of existential threat that's occurring in your own city. It doesn't really matter. The point is, though, you do need to be able to move the masses. And in an African sense, I already know, prices of flour is too high. That's enough to galvanize them in a specific movement.
Good, good, good. Dr. Thunder, closing thoughts, ideas about the conversation.
Yeah. So good conversation. Um, this seems to be sort of an age old sort of struggle, not just being had by folks in our community, but as a general thing. One thing that I talked about on one of my car thunders, I think earlier this week, it could have been the episode I did on Monday, is the value of conversation. And, but also in that, I talked about the sort of, there's different camps even in the academy. And one of the reasons why I think I have certain kinds of criticisms of the academy is that there's a lot of talk about broadening the mind. There's a lot of talk about, the value of education and all that. And all that stuff is great. That's wonderful. But if the academy doesn't make some adjustments and doesn't continue to do so, it's going to be outpaced by trade schools. And trade schools, are more hands-on. They tend to have a stronger connection with the actual industry that the certificate or the certification that they're going to get, is related to. They tend to do a better job of job placement. The instructors at these trade schools tend to be folks that are actually working in the industry. And so it makes it much more of a direct line to the sort of career that the person wants. And it's a lot less expensive. So broadening the mind, I think, is valuable. But what we have to do is we have to also consider even different styles of learning and what things need to be taught which ways. Now, I think some of the more progressive academics are getting this idea, and there's these some kinds of certificate programs that they're trying to offer, where you take these 3 classes, and then the whole idea is they're trying to encourage you to complete a degree. They say, okay, well, you've checked it out, you've taken these 3 or 4 classes, and you have your certificate. But hey, why don't you go do the full thing? So it's a recruiting strategy, which I think is smart. But it also theoretically would make the university system more competitive with trade schools, which that's their whole thing. And then when you talk about how many men are going to school versus how many women, in the black community, it's like 70% women, 30% men. If you ever want to possibly see that change to be to create more parity, you're going to have to start. You're going to have to start addressing some of these issues, right? So it's interesting. So I tend to be more on the boots on the ground approach, and I think across the country, even in schools of music, the jazz faculty tends to be more boots on the ground because they're the actual ones that are actually working in the industry. Many of the and this is not 100%, but disproportionately, the traditional faculty, they don't have the same access to, you know, engagements, you know, performances, playing receptions, playing at clubs, playing, you know, at parties, you know, and all that kind of stuff, outside festivals, touring, and all that kind of stuff that jazz musicians have at their disposal. So the jazz musicians tend to be far more savvy about the actual music industry, and tend to be able to give more sort of hands-on kind of education to the student, you know, to be able to say, look, you need to establish networks this way, you need to do this hey, let me introduce you to this other person over here. Hey, this is like the top call guy here, you need to make friends with this person, you know. So there tends to be a lot more of that kind of connecting kind of stuff. And so, though I am very much a traditionalist, and of course, you know, I'm a scholar, you know, I'm researched, I'm X, Y, and Z. I also see that there is a real value to actually have your boots on the ground. So the sort of boots on the ground and you know, head in the clouds sort of approach. But I realize that most folks are not like that. And if I had to choose, I would tend to choose probably more folks that had their boots on the ground. But I see the value of both parties. My criticism of the academy is a lot of it has to do with, is the academy going to last? You know, I mean, can it last if it continues the way that it has? And when you talk about conservatory model, the, you know, schools of music, you know, the conservatory model was designed for European classical music. That's the same model that is still used. We're still using the conservatory model for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Have been using the same model. It's not adequate, and so we have to continue to change that. So anyhow, that's my thoughts.
Anyhow, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, check us out Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Next week, also, right? And Sunday is a case closed. But next week, Wednesday, getting ish done. Another exciting episode, drilling down into. And this particular episode, this was more on the idea heavy side of getting ish done. But it is important to understand this space here when it comes to bringing new things into reality. This space of the idea, and then moving into the instantiation of the idea. Okay, whether you're a startup business, you know, or you want to try to be the next Bill Gates or whatever, or you're trying to do some political entrepreneurial type stuff, it is important to understand the importance of craftsmanship and how it plays with ideas. But I think until next time, Dr. Thunder, we are out. Let me see. Did you already do Two Dads React?
It's
No,
supposed to
that's
be tomorrow. It should be tomorrow
yeah.
night. I also have another live stream I'm doing, a couple more, maybe doing tenor talks tomorrow. But I also am playing at Ginger Rabbit. Um, I'm playing there almost every Thursday this month. So yeah, so Dr. Thunder Quartet, and we're playing standards, songs out of the American Songbook. So 6:15 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's when the live stream will be up if you can't make it to the club. And it'll likely be booked up and sold out anyway. All of these shows have been booking up, so it's very cool.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right, now, everybody, be well, take care of yourself and to others. Make sure you like the video on the way out, share, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Become a channel member where you'll get access to all archived videos. And support black male media, support independent media. Super chats enabled. Super thanks for the replay gang. Cash App, Venmo, PayPal, Dr. Thunder Music, all one word. Spell out the word doctor. And we are out. Peace.